a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time for peace.
A time to stand, a time to walk, a time to help the others run. When I was a small kid, maybe 3, maximally 4 years old, I had one of my very strong childhood memories going back to that time, which is very powerful for me until today. I was standing with my father on a little hill overlooking a long valley, looking at the hill which was on the opposite side. And my father pointed that way and he said, "Over there, that is Austria. You will never be able to go there." My family and I lived by then in a village 2 miles away from the Czechoslovak-Austrian border, and the border was marked with barbed wire fences. It was in 1960s, 1970s, 1980s in the communist Czechoslovakia. Being a Christian in a communist country, it is very much like this, like living behind a barbed wire fence. You knew, if you were a Christian, that already getting up on Sunday in the morning and walking to the Sunday worship was actually a very strong witness. Very strong witness to your neighbors who didn't have the guts to do that. Very strong witness to the government, which hated you doing that. Very strong witness to your fellow Christians who were happy to meet you in the church. And he knew that there would be probably an aftermath of that. Being a student, you knew that you would be having problems at school. You would probably not get accepted to one of the best universities in the country. Being a professional adult, you knew that your career was limited and you would never be entrusted with a leadership position. Insecurity of the outcasts. 2 guys were in 1950s among many Christians who were thrown into prison for nothing, just because they were Christian. And these 2 people, even though they were a generation apart, one of them was 27-year-old and the other one was in his 50s, became very close friends. Because both of them were Christian. In a situation of a prison when you were among many people. They would meet in the prison secretly for prayers. They would be meeting for reading the Bible together. They spent in prison several years. After some time, the younger one of them was to be released. He didn't know where to go because the judge, when he was sending him to prison, prohibited him from going back to his hometown and home county. And that was the moment when the older one told him that he could go to his own village and with the help of his family, he will be able to start again. And he did so. He went to that village and he met the family, and after some time he fell in love with one of the daughters, and they got married. And miraculously, just 1 week before the wedding, the older one, the father, was unexpectedly released from prison after having spent there 13 years. 1 year after the marriage, or maybe a little bit later than that, maybe 15 months, a daughter was born. The daughter is my wife. Let's go to the next slide. Being a Christian in a communist country was not only a time of persecution, it was also a time of a very strong community. Community of trust, community of faith. And looking back at my own journey of faith, I have to acknowledge that actually in my young years, I was looking more for the human relationship than for relationship to God. And I believe it is right so as well. A church has to be a place of security, sanctuary of trust, place where you know that you can trust the people and you can say anything to anybody without being afraid that somebody would maybe tattletale on you and you would get in trouble. Church was for me my second home. Church was for me an alternative society, a place where I found refuge which I was not finding in the world outside. My uncle was a Presbyterian minister and he spent several years serving the church. Then the communist government prohibited him to keep serving any longer. Through some friends, the word was spread and a congregation, Peace USA congregation in Florida, sent this young Czech minister an invitation that he might want to come over and they would employ him as their pastor. My uncle was thinking about that for quite some time and then he decided not to accept this offer. And the reasoning? He said, actually wrote in a letter to them, you know, the 10 square feet on which I am standing, I cannot give up. And if I accepted your offer, I would be feeling like I gave up the 10 square feet of freedom in this country. He spent 2 years in jail afterwards. There is time to stand. There are times in Christian life, in Christian witness, when the strongest witness is to stand your ground. And that's all that is needed. But there are also other times. Let's move. In 1989, Czechoslovakia gained its political freedom. This is a picture of a demonstration which was one of those that led to those occasions. For the church, this was a great and exciting time. It was a time when we were celebrating worships after many years, actually after 40 years, in freedom again. In freedom and liberty. One of the things which was so exciting for our church was that we were allowed again to do social work. Let's move to the next slide. The social work which the church was prohibited from doing for the past 40 years. The communist government made sure that the church could not do any social work, the church could not do any mission work, the church could not do any humanitarian work outside of its walls. It wanted to pretend to be being a government which tolerates religious freedom, and so they did tolerate Christians to some extent if you were practicing your Christianity inside of the walls of your house and inside of the walls of your church. We were not allowed to step outside with the word, and we were not allowed to step outside with a deed. Can you imagine how hard it is for Christians when you preach action and you cannot do that? When you feel like you really want to put into action your words and there is no way for you? That is why so many people ended up in prison among our ministers and also lay members of our congregations. After 1989, an exciting time started because we were allowed to again turn our words into action. That was the moment when Diaconia was created. Diaconia, an organization which was prohibited for 40 years. The two pictures which you can see connect the history. On one hand, on the left upper corner, you can see diaconesses of the times when the communists prohibited diaconia in late 1940s. In the lower right picture, you can see nowadays clients of diaconia, children and youth with mental handicaps. And between these two pictures, a gap of 40 years when the organization was non-existent. On the next slide, we will see a map of the Czech Republic, how the church was able to spread its services to people throughout the country. In a country which is predominantly agnostic, in a country which, after 40 years of communism, has a really hard time to find its way to Christianity and to Christian faith, one of the possible ways how we can approach our fellow citizens, one of the possible ways how we can preach to them is through action. It is time to walk. It is time for action. It is time to show the others that what we as Christians are preaching are not just empty words, but we really mean it. And we are willing to go the extra mile because of that, because of what we believe. After 1989, in 1990s, we were living through the times of walking the ways of Jesus, walking the ways where the word of Jesus was leading us, walking the ways of the scriptures. Let's move on. The organization of Diaconia was existing for 20 years. It was the year 2010 when one of the leaders of Diaconia was invited to go to Ethiopia for a conference about world hunger. All of the delegates came to Addis Ababa and were placed in a very nice hotel which was guarded for security reasons. For 1 week, the delegates were talking about hunger in the world and how terrible it is, and then they got on their planes and flew back home. Not our delegate. A lady by the name of Eva Grolova wanted to know what the hunger in Ethiopia really looks like. And she spent 2 weeks traveling through Ethiopia, and then she went home. And she came home horror-struck on one hand and excited on the other. She was horror-struck by the depth of misery in Ethiopia. She was horror-struck by the misery which she saw. And at the same time, she was excited about the work which the Ethiopian Evangelical Church Mekane Yezu does among its people. And that was the moment when our organization started thinking about moving on from working in our own country to helping others, to supporting others. That was the moment when we realized that actually during the 20 years which have passed since the time that we had gained our political freedom, we had been very blessed. All of a sudden, Ethiopia and this Ethiopian experience with one of our sisters helped us to realize that we are part of the rich world. And that walking is not enough, that we are here now to help the others run. Since then, we started focusing on working in other countries, and you can see the list on this slide. And I'm not going to go from one project to the other and tell you what they are about. They are exciting, all of them, and I'm afraid that we would be sitting here way past midnight if I ever did that. If you want to know more about these projects, there are some brochures back there on the table, and there is also a sign-up sheet for a newsletter in English language which we send out. Plus, I will be here till Saturday morning so we can talk. What I want to focus now on, because this is a sermon, are some of the personal stories. Dage, actually the first woman who I met, I could say, in Ethiopia. A lady who, having 2 children, while she was giving birth to the third one, had to be brought into the hospital, and she had to spend all that she owned, and it was very little, for her medical care, because the giving birth got a little bit complicated. In that situation, her husband left her, and she stayed completely alone with 3 children. Husband was the breadwinner, she was the one who was taking care of the family. She did as much as she could to be able to provide for the 3 children, but she could not make it. She could not find any job. She was not able to beg enough to be able to provide food for her kids. She decided that the only way out was to die. She virtually went out in front of the hospital where she gave birth to her 3rd child. She lay down there and she was waiting for the death. That was the place where members of the Ethiopian church Mekane Jesus find her. They found her there. They provided some basic nourishment, and then when the family was secured, they offered Dage that she could enter a program which they started doing with our church, with the Czech Presbyterian Church. And part of this program was that Dage would receive training and she could start a job. Dage received training and she opened a little store. Very easy one, she cut just a window in her hut, and she used money which we sent her from the Czech Republic, some $500, to buy the basic things which her neighbors would want to buy from her, and she started selling stuff. From the first money which she made, she bought some chickens, and slowly she was able to save and buy even some goats. There are many women like Dage in Ethiopia. Another example, another personal story is Tudor. Tudor lives in Moldova, and he is a little farmer. The problem in Moldova is a great unemployment. People of my age in Moldova have very hard time finding any kind of job. Many of them are small farmers, but they don't own more than 2 or 3 acres of land. That is not enough to provide for their family. What Moldovans do is they take advantage of Moldova being a European country, Eastern European, close to European Union. They go and travel to Europe and work legally in European Union in countries like Czech Republic or Italy or Spain. They leave their family behind. They leave their children behind. And what often happens to their children is that since parents are gone and the children are growing up with their grandmothers and grandfathers, the children decide that they want to go to Europe too, because they believe that that's the place where they can make better life. That's the promised land. At least many of Moldovan youngsters believe that. And then they end up in hands of gangs. Girls very often end up as prostitutes, and young men very often end up as cheap labor force in construction business. Tudor didn't want to break away from his family. Tudor didn't want his children to stay behind. As a Christian, he really wanted to keep the family together, but it was impossible. There was no way how he could make a living out of a 3-acre farm and provide for his children. Until he came to the Czech Republic, and he spent some time with a Czech farmer who taught him how to build greenhouses, and then Tudor came back to Moldova and he built greenhouses on his farm, and now he has been producing green peppers and paprikas and apricots and many other fruits in his greenhouses. And the third person which I want to talk about is Eva. Eva lives in Syria. She is in her 70s. She is 73 years old, and she is one of the few people who in her profession still stayed in Damascus, Syria. Most of her colleagues left. Eva is the Czech ambassador to Syria. Most of the embassies of Western European countries, including United States, have closed their doors. Eva is a courageous lady who decided to stay. And one of the reasons why she is staying is that she has the advantage of being an ambassador of a small country that has a name which many people have not heard before, and those who have very often don't even know where the country is. Sometimes it has an advantage of being a small community. Let's move on. The question is why? Why do we do that? Why did we want to make the next step? And as a response to this, I would like to use the parable of the Good Samaritan. I don't think that I need to read it for you here, because everybody knows it by heart. And there are three main things which I want to pull out of the parable and remind you of. The first one is everyone matters. One human life is very important. This is one thing which is very important to us because our church is small, and we are a denomination which has been spread around in many different communities. We know how to work in small communities, how to work in small groups. The other thing which is important in this parable is that our hands make a difference. God uses us. God uses our hands. God uses our work, our creativity, our abilities, our gifts. Without us, without the hands of the Good Samaritan, people cannot be helped. And the third thing is that together we can do things which we wouldn't be able to achieve alone. The Good Samaritan would not be able to provide full help if it were not for the pub keeper that took care of the ill person afterwards. If you look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, there is a question in the beginning. The question is, who is my neighbor? And the question is as important nowadays as it has been important when Jesus was talking about this topic with the Pharisee. Who is my neighbor is asking the Pharisee. Who is my neighbor are asking many people nowadays. Are my neighbors the old or the young? Who should I help? Are my neighbors Christians or are they Muslims or Buddhists? Are my neighbors refugees or is it my pet? Well, many people make this kind of a choice. If you look at many organizations which help, they focus on the young, they focus on children, and they forget about the old. I believe that we as Christians have to look at the need of all the people, not only those who are more interesting or who are more easy to focus on from the PR's point of view. Many churches in the Czech Republic, I don't know about United States, currently when there are migrants coming in are stressing that we want to accept migrants, but we want to accept only Christian migrants. It is a strong statement of our denomination, with all that we have gone through, that we want to be helping everybody who is in need, everybody who is trying to escape war, regardless of their religion. And the refugees or pets, one of the Czech politicians, it was the former Czech ambassador to Austria, now when migrants are coming to Europe, said, if there were thousands of dogs on the European borders, I believe that there would be many people who would open their homes for them and welcome those lonely dogs in their homes. But since there are thousands of people, there are very few who are willing to open their doors. The question of the Pharisee was, who is my neighbor? But if you look into the Bible, Jesus turns this question around. Jesus uses exactly the parable of the Good Samaritan and he uses that to say, who proved to be a neighbor to the one who ended up in the bloodshed? Am I a neighbor? That is the question. Let's look at a short video.
I sometimes say that Diaconia has a long interrupted history because it started in late 1800s with the diaconal movement in the evangelical church, and it went uninterrupted until the 1950s when the communist regime prohibited the organization completely.
And the organization lost all property, and most of the staff were sent to other areas of the country. So in 1989, when the regime here fell, the organization wanted to be reestablished, but they had a lack of funds and administrative capacities.
For 30 years we were not existent, and we were redeveloped in 1990s with the big help of our partner churches from different countries, including Presbyterian Church USA.
Presbyterian congregations and American partners were really important in providing money and funds, but also spiritual support and help for the church and for Diaconia to get it back on its feet. And so for the past 20 years, Diaconia has been able to expand our projects abroad and domestically here within the Czech Republic.
We have been needing help from outside as a small church in diaspora, and now in the situation after 1990, when we are living now in a free country, we have also developed some possibilities to help otherwise, because people here say we have been getting so many help from all over the world that we want to give something to somebody who needs it more than we are needing it.
The church here has a really well-developed partnership with Diaconia, which is for them the expression of ministry as it meets the needs of people.
We have a lot of news from all over the world about people in need, and we have a lot of opportunities how to help. And we also have, through Diaconia, access to the places and people who accept the help. And it's for us important that Diaconia is a part of the church.
We work in different countries on different continents. We work in Africa, in several countries. We work in Middle East. We work in Eastern Europe, and we work in Southeast Asia. And basically all of our projects are focused on either societies who have been getting out of a post-totalitarian system, that is a situation of the Eastern European countries, or for example Burma in Southeast Asia, or it is aimed at situations situations of minorities, of small groups, of people who are too small for big agencies and big international NGOs to notice them.
Because the Czech Church has lived through totalitarianism, they are more apt to be able to work in countries that are currently transitioning from those systems or still within a totalitarian system. So some of the problems that society has with caring for the elderly, political freedoms, economic development, and how to develop after that system has fallen.
We say to ourselves, oh, well, communism was a long time ago. Well, it was only a generation ago. And the Czech Republic and other countries in this part of Europe, they continue to live with the legacy of that. They know this journey in a way none of us in the United States can ever know what it's like. And so I think the best we can do is be in solidarity with them and to not turn our back on them and to say, we are with you in this and we will help you as much as we can.
We are a very small church, and I think we especially need to experience that we are a part of the body of Christ in the whole world. And with these ecumenical relations, we just see in the United States and in many other countries that we are not alone, that we are together part of this body of Christ, and we are serving to this world together.
I belong to the generation who lived half of our lives in a totalitarian system and the other half of our lives in democracy. And for us who are Christians, living in a very totalitarian society and going through many different complicated things and hardships, it was a great hope that there were other Christians in other countries who were supporting us with their prayers, with their kind words, and sometimes even with financial support. And Presbyterian Church USA was one of those. Now we are in a completely different situation. We are in a situation of a free society where we can go ahead and together, Presbyterians in the US and Presbyterians in the Czech Republic, be working with other people and supporting them.
The motto that we use in the United States is, you helped us walk, together let's help others run. And we really do believe that with Czechs and Americans working together, not only are American congregations able to see the fruits of their good labor and good work 20 years ago, but now there's an exciting opportunity for both Czechs Americans, Czech brethren and Presbyterians to work together to help others across the world take those same steps the Czech Republic had to take 20 years ago.
There are two reasons why we as Diaconia are working on these projects. One reason is that we feel that we are called to help those people who need our help. The other reason is that we are doing it for our own church, because we believe that church grows only when it serves others. We believe that church grows only when it sees needs behind its borders, outside of its comfort zones. And we believe that we are called to do that.
On one of my journeys, when I was driving through Moldova, I saw this well. This is a typical Eastern European well. And I took some pictures of them, and then when I was looking at them, it reminded me of a parable of a well, which I would like to use at the end of this. Needs are so big and deep, and we are so small. Can you see the person there? And yet, everything was given to us, and all that is needed is just a little bit of work. Let us pray. God, looking at other people, we realized how blessed we have been, how much we have received. We want to thank you for your gifts, and we want to ask you to give us the wisdom and courage to be recognizing our talents and sharing it with others, so your kingdom may be spreading around. Amen.